Welcome, friends. You're watching Animal Quests. Today I'll be covering some of the most brutal and also the dumbest last selfies with animals ever taken, beginning with a couple that thought that bears were so friendly, until they were not. It was the 10th of May, 2019, and a warm spring Saturday had brought the crowds out to a large city zoo in southern Poland, where the brown bear enclosure sits near the middle of the site and is usually one of the busiest places there. Derek and Halina Nowicki were 56 and 54, a Polish couple from a small city south of Warsaw, who had been coming to that zoo for years. The bears were the reason. They knew the animals, they knew the names on the signs, and they had hundreds of photographs going back a decade. What they did not have was a photograph of the two of them with a bear close behind, and that is what they went there for. The animals in that enclosure had been born in captivity and never known anything else, and that is what makes a zoo bear so easy to misread. A brown bear raised around people is not tame, it is simply unafraid, and it keeps every instinct it was born with. A grown male can pass 250 kilos. Years of visitors dropping food over the rail teach the bears to come to the front, to sit up, and to watch anybody who stops, and none of it means what people think it means. The barriers there were built the way barriers in old zoos are built, to keep the bears in rather than to keep people out. A waist-high public rail ran along the viewing side, then a planted strip a couple of meters wide, then a dry moat dropping 3 or 4 meters to the enclosure floor. Signs on the rail told visitors not to climb, lean, or feed the animals. Behind all of it was the part visitors never think about, that no keeper can go in with adult brown bears. So the only responses are water, noise, food to lure them into the holding dens, and a vet with a dart that takes minutes to work. A bear behind a zoo barrier is the easiest animal in the world to misjudge, because everything about the setting says exhibit. What is actually on the other side of that rail is a predator that has never had a reason to be frightened of a person, in an enclosure designed on the assumption that nobody would ever climb into it. I have seen people hold food out over zoo barriers for a photo, and it makes my stomach drop, because a captive bear is still a bear, and it never agreed to any of that. What happened next was in front of a crowd, and most of it was on the zoo's own cameras. It was late in the afternoon, and the rail had thinned out. 2 bears were out on the far side. Derek climbed over the public rail into the planted strip, and Halina followed him, and they worked along to the edge of the moat where the rockwork gives the cleanest view. They set up the picture there. Halina had the phone out at arm's length, framing the two of them with the enclosure behind, and Derek stepped back along the lip of the moat to get the bears in. It had rained that morning, and the shaped concrete at the edge was still wet. He went down on it, and rather than falling back into the planted strip, he went over the lip and dropped the full depth of the moat. He was moving down there and calling up to her, and people along the rail were already shouting and running for staff. Halina climbed down after him. There is a service ladder set into that wall for the keepers, and she used it and went to him. Both bears came across. They did not charge and did not rush. They came at a walk from the far side, the way they had walked to the front of that enclosure for food every day of their lives, and the crossing took under a minute. What happened when they reached the couple was witnessed by dozens of people, and it is the part nobody there has wanted to describe since. Neither of them could climb and neither could run, and a brown bear does not need to be angry to kill a person on flat ground inside its own enclosure. The keepers were at the barrier within a couple of minutes, and there was nothing they could do from where they stood, because they cannot enter with bears loose. They put hoses on the animals, banged the rails, opened the doors to the holding dens, and threw food in to draw the bears off, and the duty vet was preparing a dart before he reached the enclosure. It took several more minutes to get both bears in through the den doors and shut them. Only then could anybody go over the wall. Both were dead when the keepers reached them. Prosecutors found that the couple had crossed a public barrier, ignored its signs, and entered an area no visitor is allowed in, and that the enclosure met the standards it was built to. Neither bear was destroyed, since neither had escaped or done anything unusual for a bear on its own ground. There was no shortage of footage. The zoo's cameras covered that rail, visitors were filming before anybody understood what was happening, and Halina's phone was recovered from the enclosure floor, the last photographs on it time-stamped minutes before the first call. All of it went to the prosecutors. None was released, and the family asked through a lawyer that it never be published. What I can't let go of is that they climbed a barrier for a photo, and for the few seconds it took, not one part of it felt dangerous to them. Nothing suggested the bears had been waiting for anybody. They were captive animals taught by 10,000 visitors that people at the front of that enclosure mean food, and when 2 of them arrived on the floor of it instead, they crossed at a walk to find out why. That was a barrier climbed for a photograph. Our next story moves to eastern Maharashtra in India and a young man who wanted a tiger behind him. It was the 3rd of December, 2016, and a thin winter mist still lay over the teak forest of eastern Maharashtra in central India, where village fields run right up to the boundary of a tiger reserve. Dilip Yuki was 26 and lived in one of those villages. He had grown up beside tiger country and was used to seeing the animals from the road, and he had a few hundred followers who liked his clips from the forest edge. When word went round that a tigress was lying up in the grass within sight of a village road on the farmland side of the reserve boundary, half a dozen motorcycles went out, and his was one of them. Tiger attacks on people are a recurring problem in parts of India, most often around reserve edges where farmland runs into forest. Inside the reserve, visitors must generally stay in their vehicles except at designated places, and the reason is a behavioral one. Those rules did not cover a public road outside the boundary, but the animal on the other side of the ditch was the same. Tigers in heavily visited reserves can become accustomed to safari vehicles, and one will often lie in the open with a line of engines idling 30 meters off. What it is far less accustomed to is somebody leaving a vehicle and approaching on foot. A tiger often relies on a short, explosive ambush. She will lie flat and let a thing come to her, and when she goes, she covers the ground faster than a person can react to, never mind outrun. A tiger can use cover to approach a person who has lost sight of it, and large prey is taken off its feet with the jaws closing on the throat or nape, then dragged into cover. None of that changes because the person in front of her is holding up a phone. There is a strange arithmetic people do at the edge of a forest like that. They see the animal as calm, they mistake calm for safe, and then they take one step past the line it was tolerating without ever knowing where that line was.
Every time I see a crowd of bikes at a tiger sighting, I think the same thing, that they see an attraction, but oh boy, believe me, the tiger sees something else entirely.
The men on the bikes gave near identical accounts of what happened next. The tigress was lying in the yellow grass 30 meters off the road, on her side, in full view. The bikes stopped in a line and the men stayed on them, filming across the ditch, and for a while that was all it was. Then Dilip got off his bike. He wanted the shot none of the others would have, with her clearly in it behind him, so he crossed the ditch and walked out into the open grass toward her, alone and on foot, while the others shouted at him to come back. He got to within perhaps 15 meters, turned his back on the animal, and lifted the phone to frame himself with the tigress over his shoulder. She came up out of the grass. The witnesses reported no obvious warning before she charged, and at that distance there was almost no time to react. She came out of the grass in a short charge and hit him from behind, driving him flat, and the whole weight of her came down on top of him. She caught him high on the neck and held him there, which is where a tiger can use its jaws and its body weight to pin something down. And against that, a man cannot turn, cannot reach behind himself, and cannot get out from underneath her. Within seconds, he was no longer able to fight back. Whatever noise he made was lost in the shouting from the road. The grass went flat where he had gone down, and for a few moments, the only movement out there was the shifting of her shoulders as she settled her grip on him. Then she began to move him, taking him by the neck and dragging him into the taller grass at the tree line, unhurried, away from the noise on the road. None of the shouting behind her changed her pace. The men on the bikes did everything they could. They screamed, leaned on their horns, revved the engines, and threw stones into the grass after her, and one rode along the road parallel to where she had gone. She did not drop him and did not come back out, and within a minute the grass had closed. Forest personnel first used vehicles, shouting, and other deterrents to move the tigress off. A search party then went in and found his remains several hundred meters inside the tree line, with signs consistent with feeding at the site. Forest officials recorded that he had left his motorcycle and approached a wild tiger on foot. Officials investigated the circumstances and continued monitoring the tigress rather than immediately ordering her capture. His phone was recovered near the attack site and turned over to investigators, and the images stayed with the forest department. And although one blurred still ran on a local news bulletin, it was pulled at his family's request, and nothing else has been shown.
He was 26 and had lived beside those forests his whole life. And honestly, something about that fact will just be stuck in my mind forever now.
She had not gone looking for him. She had been lying up in her own forest with a road full of engines she had heard every day of her life, and what was different that morning was a man on foot closing the distance with his back turned. That was 15 meters too close. Our next story goes to a river town in the southern Philippines and a young man who wanted the water behind him. It was the 26th of March, 2021, and a heavy afternoon heat sat over a wide brown river in the southern Philippines, the kind of slow tropical water that hides everything in it. Jomar Tabuena was 23 and had lived beside that river all his life. His family fished it, and he had swum in it as a boy, and the village had been warned repeatedly that a very large saltwater crocodile was working that stretch. It had been seen for months. The village office had told people to stay out of the shallows and keep children off the banks, and several livestock losses had been blamed on it. The saltwater crocodile is the largest living reptile and one of the species most capable of taking a person as prey. A large male can exceed 5 meters and weigh hundreds of kilos, and the species is responsible for numerous attacks on people across northern Australia and Southeast Asia. It is no chaser but an ambush hunter, lying motionless just off a bank with nothing showing but eyes and nostrils, detecting movement and vibration in the water, and it often works the shallows and channel edges, where anything at the water is easiest to reach. When it goes in one lunge out of water that looked empty a second earlier. Once the jaws close, the grip is extraordinarily powerful and very hard to break, and from there, the animal may roll, may reverse into deeper water, or may do both, and any of it is enough to drown and disable what it has hold of. A river like that gives nothing away. No fin, no ripple, no shape under the surface, just brown water and an animal that may have been lying a few meters off the bank since long before you got there.
The part that always trips me up with crocodile stories is that the warnings have gone out. Animals had already been taken off that bank, and it still almost is never enough.
His two friends were on the bank and gave the police the same account. Late that afternoon, the three of them came down to where the bank shelves off gently, a spot people in the area still used. One of them had seen the crocodile out in the middle earlier, and that was the point. Jomar waded out to knee depth, then to his thighs, turned to face the bank with the open water behind him, and took the photograph of himself standing in the river. The water behind him was flat and brown and gave no sign of anything. The strike came from his left, out of water that had shown nothing. It came as a surge of water and weight, and a sound the friends described as a heavy slap, and the jaws closed across his thigh and hip and took him off his feet. Beyond the shallows, the river deepened quickly, and once he was off his feet, the animal had deep water within a couple of strokes. He went under sideways in the same movement. There was one arm up out of the water, and a shout that stopped halfway through, and then a churn of white and brown where he had been standing, and that was the last either of them saw of him upright. From the first surge of water to the last of him showing above it, the two of them put it at under a minute. The water where he had been standing was thigh deep and no more, and it had been enough. The animal reversed into the deeper channel with him and rolled him under, taking him further out from the bank as it went. The noise off that stretch of river brought half the street down to the water. Both friends went in after him, which neither of them could explain afterward beyond saying they were not thinking at all. One friend managed to reach his wrist in chest-deep water, but the crocodile pulled him away before he could get any grip on him. He surfaced once more out in the middle of the channel, still in the animal's jaws, his body moving with the roll. Then the water went over him and did not break again, and the river ran on as it had all afternoon. Boats were out within the hour, and the search ran through the night and the next day. His body was recovered 2 days later downstream, caught in roots under a bank, and the injuries were consistent with a crocodile attack, with signs investigators also took to be consistent with feeding. Wildlife officers set baited traps along that stretch, and a large crocodile matching the size described was captured weeks later and removed, though officials could not establish that it was the same animal. The photograph he had taken minutes earlier went into the river with him. His phone was in a pocket and was never recovered, so the last picture Jomar Tabuena took has never been recovered.
Two friends went into that water after him with their bare hands, and I don't know a braver or more hopeless thing than that. My heart honestly just goes out to them.
The crocodile had not been lying in wait for him in particular. It had been doing what its kind has done in rivers like that for millions of years, holding still at the edge of the deep water for whatever came to the shallows, and that afternoon it was him. That was a picture that never got off the phone. Our next story goes to far north Australia, and a young man filming himself in the water with a shark. It was the 7th of January, 2014, and a still, hot summer evening was settling over a bay on the far north Queensland coast, the water flat and the light already going. Brody Kavanagh was 21, out on a mate's boat with 3 others at the end of a long day, with a small action camera on a handle that he used mostly to film himself. They had been fishing since morning and throwing scraps and frames over the side all afternoon as they cleaned the catch, which is the detail that matters most in what followed. The tiger shark grows past 4 meters and has an unusually broad diet, taking fish, turtles, seabirds, and carrion, and its broad, heavily serrated teeth are built to cut through tough prey, turtle shell included. 2 things were stacked against anybody in that water. Discarded fish and bait had been putting food into it all afternoon, which can draw scavenging sharks in and hold them around a boat. And it was dusk, which is not a rule so much as a risk factor, because visibility drops away and a shark in low light has every advantage over a swimmer who cannot see it coming. I grew up being told to stay out of the water at dusk, and every single one of the men on that boat boat had been told exactly the same. There is an old and very wrong idea that a shark you can see is the dangerous one. The one that matters is the one already in the water below the boat that nobody has spotted at all.
Filming a big shark from the deck is one thing, and I get the appeal, but going in at dusk beside a boat that spent all day throwing scraps is beyond me.
The three men on the boat and the camera itself account for what followed. They saw the shark first from the deck, a broad shape crossing under the stern in the last of the light, and there was the usual noise and pointing. Brody came back up with the camera on its handle and went over the side in nothing but board shorts, filming himself with it, expecting to be in the water only briefly. He was in the water perhaps a minute and a half. The men on deck said the shark passed him once at a distance and that he swam a few strokes toward where it had passed, camera out in front, and that it turned and came back, closer, and he stayed where he was to keep it in frame. On another pass, it hit him. The witnesses reported no obvious change in its behavior before the bite, and it took him low, across the thigh and the back of the leg. The men on the boat heard the impact before they understood it. A hard slap of water, and then Brody suddenly a meter out of position and shouting. The bite of an animal that size needs no second attempt. The bite had opened major blood vessels high in the leg, and blood spread rapidly into the water around him. He got one arm up to the side of the boat. Two had him by the wrists and were hauling while the third grabbed the gaff, but never got a safe angle to use it, and the shark came back underneath during the rescue and caught the same leg again, wrenching him back toward the water, so that for a moment they were dragging against it with him between them. They got him over the gunwale into the bottom of the boat. One man got a tourniquet high on the thigh straight away and hauled it tight while another called for emergency help, and the skipper turned the boat and headed for the nearest ramp. He stayed conscious for several minutes of that run and then became unresponsive. With injuries like that and roughly half an hour's run back to the nearest boat ramp, there was little anyone aboard could do beyond keep the tourniquet tight and keep running. Brody was pronounced dead by paramedics on the boat ramp. Footage from the camera gave fisheries officers enough of a view to identify a tiger shark, and it went down as a fatal attack on a swimmer who had entered the water at dusk beside a boat that had spent the day discarding bait and fish waste. Authorities issued a temporary warning for the area while fisheries officers assessed the incident. The camera was still running when they pulled him aboard and recorded most of it, and it went to the police with his gear, and then to the coroner. It has never been released, and beyond the investigators, nobody outside that boat has seen it. Nothing suggested the shark had been hunting a person. A day of fish scraps had put food in the water, and it had come into that the way a scavenging feeder does, and a person in the water was an unfamiliar object in an area where fish waste had been drawing feeding activity. That was a minute and a half in the water. Our next story travels to a game park in Zimbabwe, and to a young woman who had paid for a photograph with a lion. It was the 19th of October, 2017, and a dry, hot morning lay over a private wildlife facility outside Victoria Falls in northwestern Zimbabwe, at the end of the season when the grass is down and the air is full of dust. Elke Petzold was 29, a German visitor at the end of a month traveling, and she had booked what the place was known for, a walk with two human-reared lions habituated to controlled sessions, and a photograph at the end. She had joined several supervised sessions that week and had become familiar with the younger male. Rearing a lion around people can make it unusually tolerant of them without making its behavior predictable, and tolerance is not the same thing as safety. Even a young male approaching 2 years old can be big enough to overpower a person, and he does not need temper or malice to kill somebody. A familiar lion still has the same jaws, the same claws, and the same weight as any other. That is why walks like that run on rules rather than trust. Visitors stay upright, stay in a group, keep to the position the handler puts them in, and do not touch the animals unless told to. Guests are told to stay upright and to stay where the handlers put them, and crouching or turning away breaks that positioning and changes the spacing the handlers are working to. A week of walking beside an animal every day will make you feel like it knows you, and I understand that feeling right up until the second it stops being true. Every operation that puts people next to lions runs on the same quiet bargain, that nothing surprising will happen as long as everyone follows the handler exactly. It can hold for years at a time, and it only has to fail once.
I understand wanting that photograph, I honestly do, but there's no such thing as a safe lion. Only lions that have not been given a reason yet.
The handlers and the group behind her all described the same few seconds. The walk had gone the way those walks always go, the two lions moving ahead with the handlers spread around them and the group behind, and at the end, they stopped for photographs, one visitor at a time. Standing at the shoulder of the older male with a handler at their elbow, Elke went last. Instead of taking her place beside the older lion and the handler, she moved across to the younger male on her own, which was not what she had been told to do and not what anybody there was expecting. She crouched down at his flank with her own phone held out in front front of her, put her free hand on his back, and turned her face and shoulders away from him toward the camera. He turned and took her by the back of the neck. He pulled her over into the grass and came down over her with his full weight, and the handler nearest her was shouting before she had even gone all the way down. The handlers moved in immediately, striking the ground beside him and using the poles to try to drive him back, shouting at him, but he held on. Noise alone did not make him release, and each attempt to force him only made him grip and turn away with her. The second lion moved in toward the commotion as well, forcing part of the team to keep it back while the others worked on the younger male, and the visitors were run back toward the vehicles. What eventually worked was a support vehicle. The operation kept close to the walk. They brought it in between him and the handlers, using the engine and the horn to drive him off, and he let go of her and moved away across the grass. She was alive when they reached her and still alive when the vehicle got her back to the park buildings. The injuries were to the neck and throat, and the handlers could do little beyond controlling the bleeding they could reach and keeping her positioned as safely as they could while they prepared to move her. The facility had first aid supplies, but nothing capable of treating a catastrophic neck injury. An air evacuation was requested, but she deteriorated before she could be transferred to definitive care. The park suspended the line walks that day and did not resume them while the operation was reviewed. The park's investigation found that Elke had left the designated position, approached the younger male, and crouched and turned away against explicit instruction, and it also examined its own supervision since a visitor had been able to do all of that before anybody could stop her. The younger male was pulled out of the walking program and kept under review rather than destroyed. There was a great deal of footage. Her own phone was recording when she crouched, other visitors were filming, and the park had cameras on the walk. All of it became part of the park's investigation and the legal process that followed, and none of it has been released. The lion had not turned on her and had not betrayed anything, because he had never agreed to any of it. He was a predator raised to tolerate people, which is not the same as safe around them, and the last thing she did before he moved was crouch and turn away. For our final story, we travel to a palm plantation in Indonesia, and to a man who found a snake big enough to be worth photographing. It was the 29th of August, 2022, and the light was going out of a hot, wet evening over a palm plantation on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, where the cut rows run straight into thick secondary forest. Rahmat Sanghaji was 31 and worked that plantation, walking the same track home along the tree line every evening. Snakes there were nothing new. What he found lying across it that evening was not an ordinary snake, and the first thing he did was take out his phone. The reticulated python is generally regarded as the world's longest living snake. A big one passes 6 meters, and Indonesia has documented several cases of very large pythons killing and swallowing adults. It has no venom, which can make people underestimate how dangerous a snake that size is. What it has instead is a mouth of long, backward curving teeth that anchor its bite and make pulling free very difficult, and a body strong enough to kill a wild pig. It ambushes, striking at whatever comes within reach of its head, and in the same motion throws its coils around it. The coils do not work by slow smothering. They compress hard enough to impair blood circulation and cardiovascular function, and that can cause loss of consciousness before a person can free themselves. And a snake that size can eat what it kills. The two halves of its lower jaw are joined by an elastic ligament rather than fused like ours, and with the mobile bones of the skull, it can take prey far wider than its head looks able to swallow. There is something about a snake lying still that makes people feel they have already won. It seems slow right up until the instant it is not.
A snake that size is not something you pose with. It's something I would walk a very wide circle around and leave completely alone.
Nobody saw what happened on that track. What follows is the reconstruction investigators built from his phone, the ground, and the animal itself. The last image on the phone was taken at 18 minutes past 6. A picture of himself at arm's length with his face in the corner of the frame and the snake stretched across the track behind him, placing him only a short distance from the animal. At some point after that, he came within striking range of its head. Investigators could not establish why and did not try to, beyond concluding that he had closed the distance. The scene was consistent with the snake striking from close range and taking hold of his forearm. The bite itself is usually not what makes an attack like that fatal. It is the hold, and with those teeth anchored in the arm, pulling free would have been very difficult. The disturbance and the injuries suggested it had then wrapped around his upper body. The ground where he went down was a broad patch of flattened vegetation and churned mud, and the disturbance showed a violent struggle there, though a man with one arm anchored and coils across his chest has almost nothing left to work with. The flattened vegetation and churned mud showed that a struggle had taken place there. Once the coils were on him, the struggle would have worked against him. Every effort to drag the arm free, pulling tighter on what was already around his chest, and a snake of that length has more than enough body to keep adding turns. Compression like that impairs circulation and cardiovascular function, causing unconsciousness far faster than the slow suffocation people usually imagine. His phone was found in the mud a couple of meters from the main area of disturbance, and there was no house within earshot. A meal that large takes a long time to get down, and the snake was still near the site the next morning. His family went looking that night when he did not come in, out along the track with torches until it was too dark. Next morning, a search party found the python lying up in the undergrowth 30 meters off the path, close to 7 meters long and visibly distended, consistent with having recently swallowed a large meal. Villagers killed it before wildlife officials arrived, and when it was opened, his remains were found inside. Officials recorded it as a python attack on a man who had approached a very large snake alone. He had sent the photograph to friends within a minute of taking it, and it went round the island for a day or two before the family asked people to stop sharing it. The original came down, but copies could never be pulled back completely. The phone went to the police, and the last picture he ever took has not been published since.
Of all 6 of these, this is the one I will never get out of my head the most, because he was doing nothing but walking home from work at the end of the day, something most people watching can really relate to, right?
Nothing suggested the snake had been tracking him or lying in wait. It was an ambush animal doing the only thing it knows, taking hold of whatever comes within reach and refusing to let go, and he had closed the distance himself for a photograph that circulated for a day or two.